So when we're coaching, we are generally speaking moving people not through cycles of disruption necessarily. Usually, when we're coaching, they've already gone through the crisis of the disruptive cycle. They're sitting in that space where they can't go back. They don't want to go back to how things used to be. They really want to go forward. They're looking for a path, a momentum, a new narrative to call them forward into something bigger than who they are, than who they were, a bigger expression of who they are, right? And we're working with them to explore, how do you rewrite the narrative? And part of understanding what needs to happen for that narrative to be rewritten is also an exploration around what was the source of disruption, and what kinds of disruption, what was the lesson or the message, and most importantly, and I think this is a thing to pay attention to, how did your emotional theme by type play out in the disruptive process? When we're looking at type, it's really important to remember that the emotional theme for type is oftentimes an indicator of where they are in that cycle of disruption, or what happened in that cycle of disruption. I want to stress this because I think sometimes in traditional human design, when we talk about emotional themes, we kind of talk about it in such a way that, well, this is just your emotional theme. I'm a manifester. I'm angry all the time. That's just who I am. And you're really not designed to be angry all the time, nor are you designed to be bitter all the time, or frustrated all the time, or disappointed all the time. It's not a natural part of your life that that's just how you are. Your emotional theme for your type is telling you something. It's telling you there's something going on in your world that needs to be tweaked if it's becoming a chronic issue. A manifestor is going to periodically experience anger. If you live in a house with other people and you're a manifestor type, you're probably going to experience anger because somebody's going to stand in the doorway at some point in time when you're moving through the house, and you're going to feel angry. Or somebody, if you're a parent and you're a manifestor, your kids are very often going to interfere with your creative flow, especially when they're little, right? Because that's just the nature of the game. But if you are in a situation where you are chronically angry, or the people around you are chronically angry at you, you're in the theme of anger, it's oftentimes a signal that's telling you, hey, something's going on in my environment where I'm not able to drop into the full expression of my creative flow. My creativity is not being supported. And that lack of support oftentimes it creates whatever that disruptive cycle is for the manifester. So a manifester that really isn't in an environment where they can fully, inform and then go do what they want to do. If they're informing and people are giving them guidance, or they're informing and people are telling them, no, you can't do that. If they're informing and people are not allowing them to be in that flow, and they are somehow not getting that support, even though we teach manifestors don't need anybody, they don't need anybody to get things done, but they do need to be in an environment where people get them, where people can create that space for them to follow that flow when that timing is right. And if they're chronically having problems with the anger piece, recognizing that the anger was a symptom of him not feeling like he could follow his own creative drive was a really important part of getting him out of the stuckness of that energy story, the anger story, and moving into taking back control of his story and making sure that the people he began to pull into his environment supported his creative flow. Does that make sense? The generator types, the generators, we'll talk about pure generators. The generators have the emotional theme of frustration. And the frustration walks hand in hand with quitting. And so recognizing that sometimes your generators need to really learn how to connect with that sacral, so that they know how to check in and ask themselves, I'm frustrated. That frustration is a symptom of momentum building, and I'm about to have a breakthrough. Do I need to sit with where I am right now long enough to wait for the breakthrough, or is it time for me to quit? And that exploration is huge and really something to look at when you start to explore, well, what was the disruptive process that my generator client experienced? And how did frustration play out in that disruption, because oftentimes that frustration is a part of what created the disruption. They got so so frustrated they quit, or they kept quitting and quitting and quitting and quitting and never getting to that breakthrough point, or they stuck with it when they should have quit and they didn't. And then they're stuck in a situation that they feel like they can't get out of. There's a lot of exploration there around the role of frustration and interpreting that message of frustration in a different way so that they can start to interpret frustration differently. Manifesting generator, you're going to apply everything I just said about the manifester plus everything I just said about the generator, because the manifesting generator is going to have potentially both the anger piece as well as the frustration piece, and really exploring with them again, how do I know when to quit? How do I know when to stay the course? And how do I remember to inform? And is the environment that I'm in supportive of my creative process when the timing is right, when I respond to it? Most likely, you will see, I mean, burnout is going to be a thing that's going to show up for all types for sure, but you will see a lot of burnout in your projector clients. And that burnout it is oftentimes signified by bitterness. And I want to say that really specifically that way, because the idea that I am a projector, therefore I am bitter, is a really destructive narrative, I think, that I find that most of my projector clients don't relate to and are really actually kind of confused and or hurt about it. You are not bitter because you are a projector. You are bitter because you are depleted. And that bitterness is deliberately, there's a brilliance in the bitterness, because the bitterness is repelling. And that means that repelling quality of that bitterness means you're pushing people away because you're not available for an invitation. And that bitterness is something to really be mindful of, that when it kicks in, it means one of two things. Number one, it means check in with the self-worth, because if the self-worth is not high, then you are probably going to be looking at a projector that's taking every single invitation that they can get. And they're not going to be taking care of themselves because they don't value themselves enough. And so they're making themselves available to everything, and they're taking the wrong invitations, and they're not using their energy in an optimal way, and they're getting burned out. The second thing is sometimes it's self-worth, but it's also burnout. And so that depletion is also a signal of, hey, do I need to pull back to the best of my ability? And sometimes that means you have to just go get a day job of some kind as a band-aid and really focus on, this is what I have to do for money in the interim. And then as soon as I clock out from Trader Joe's or whatever you end up doing, maybe not Trader Joe's, you go home and you work on that healing process and that restoration and renewal piece that has to happen before you can be ready to take more invitations. And of course, our reflectors have the theme of disappointment. And that disappointment is dual fold. It's the disappointment of not having enough time and being pressured by the people or the circumstances around you that force you to have to make decisions in a way that isn't aligned with how your energy works. And the disappointment sometimes too is being in the wrong environment and seeing the potential, because all those open centers, that's 9 open centers, you can see the potential, and falling in love with the potential and not realizing, oh, the potential is not actually being met, and then being deeply disappointed by the lack of actualization of the potential. So those two pieces are important to also kind of explore and look at too.